Evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Nun Aleph. You're welcome to stay. It's fine. It doesn't matter to me. We're on the very bottom of Daf Nun Amud Beis, and we are learning a sugya as to when it is that one is allowed to collect from properties that are b'nei chorin versus when one is allowed to collect from properties that are nechasim mishubadim. And we saw two shitas to this. One is that it has to be ksuvin. Once something is written in a contract, then it has enough teeth for the person who's collecting to collect from nechasim mishubadim, from properties, even properties that have a lien. And if it's not that way, then they can only collect from properties that are b'nei chorin. And another shita was not that it's written, but that it's ksuvin, that the amount of money is known. If the amount of money is known, then you can collect from nechasim mishubadim. And if the amount of money is not known, then you cannot. So it says the Gemara, Bayalahu, on the bottom of Nun Amud Beis, the Rabbi Chanina, according to Rabbi Chanina, who we saw just one line ago, who says that the deciding factor as to whether or not you can collect from properties with a lien is when they're ksuvin. According to him, if it's ksuvin, viksuvin boy, does it need both parameters in order to collect from nechasim mishubadim? Does it need to be both a fixed amount and written in the contract? O dilma, top of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, or perhaps ksuvin va'afal pi she'enon ksuvim, kitsuvin with a kuf, afal pi she'enon kisuvim. They're very similar sounding words, even though their intents are quite different. So do we need two factors? One is that it's a fixed amount, and second is that it's written in the contract, or no, do we only need it to be a fixed amount, and that alone will be enough of a reason to collect from nechasim mishubadim? So Tashma, we try and answer. The Itmar, second line of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, Misha Meis v'niach shtei banos uven. Let's say that a man dies and he has left after him is two daughters and a son. So of course, halachically, the son is the one who gets the pishnaim. He gets the money, but each girl is allowed to get 10% of, let's say he leaves over $100,000. So the son gets $100,000, but each daughter can get 10%, which is $10,000 toward the dowry for their marriages. The older daughter, we'll call her Rachel, the older daughter took $10,000 of the $100,000 and used it. And the remaining daughter, we'll call her Leah. Leah was about to collect her $10,000, but then the son died. So the son who was holding the 100,000. So let's do the math. The son got 100. Rachel took 10. There's 90 left. And then the son, that guy died. The guy who had the 100,000, now 90,000. He dies. Now there's $90,000 left. Does daughter number two get the $10,000? Yes or no? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shnia Vitra. The second daughter loses out on her $10,000. And instead of getting 10,000, which would bring the balance to 80, and then splitting 40-40 with her sister, she just splits now 90 divided by 2, which is 45. And the difference would be a difference of $5,000 in her pocket. If she would take the 10% of the dowry money, then she'd be a little bit wealthier. And this is important because we're trying to answer a question about Reb Chanina. Remember our question. When does Reb Chanina say that we're allowed to collect from nechasim mishubadim? Is it when it's both written and fixed, or even if it's only just a fixed amount? So what does Reb Chanina say over here? There was even a bigger chiddush, motziin leparnasa, that they're even allowed to collect. A woman is allowed to collect even from nechasim mishubadim for parnasa, for their salary, to keep them afloat. Ve'ein motziin lemizonos, but they cannot collect from those kinds of properties for food. That's ridiculous. You're saying that she can't even get the extra 10%. That's absolutely not true. So there's a machlokas between the two shitas here in the Amoraim. And says the Gemara, V'ha parnasa demekitz kaitza, her parnasa is in fact a fixed amount, and michtav lo ksiva, and it's not written down, v'kamotzia. And we see the Reb Chanina says, black on white, that the parnasa can be collected even though it's nechasim mishubadim, and even though it's not written down, but it is katzuv, it is a fixed amount. So therefore we see that Reb Chanina is a one issue voter. All he needs to know is that it's a fixed amount, and then you're allowed to collect from nechasim mishubadim. Says the Gemara, that's not true. You cannot prove Reb Chanina from this case. Why not? Because 10 lines down, shiny parnasa, kevan di islakala kemandik sivadame. That really there's a uniqueness to parnasa in that everybody knows that a woman who is now widowed or whatever the case may be, that she's collecting her parnasa. Everybody knows she collects her parnasa, and even though you're right, it's not actually written down, but halachically it's as if it's written down, and therefore we cannot bring a raya to the shita of Reb Chanina. The Gemara asks, Masi Rav Huna Bar Manoach, a very unique case. Ayin Sham in the Rishonim. I'll be brief in the description of the case because reading it on its own won't help. Let's say a woman was married to husband number one and he agreed to fund her for X number of years. And then they divorce or he dies. Husband number two agrees to the same thing. So there's kids from one marriage and kids from another marriage. So says the Gemara as follows, Mesu, all the husbands died, Binosehen, his actual blood daughters, Nizonos Minachasim B'nei Chorin. Those daughters can only collect their monies from properties that don't have a lien on them. But he and the daughter who is a stepdaughter, his wife's daughter, says the Gemara, they collect, it's a bigger chiddush. Where do they collect from? Nechasim mishubadim. Why? She's allowed to collect from nechasim mishubadim. That's a little bit of a chiddush. And what do we see over here? We see over here that it may be katsuv, but it's not written, and therefore maybe we have a raya for Reb Chanina. And the Gemara says, no, that's not a raya either. Third of the way down, that really when it came to the stepdaughter, there was a kinyan that took place. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. If there was such a kinyan when he got married to this woman that applied to the stepdaughter, so then banos nami, why doesn't it apply to his own daughter? Why would we distinguish between the two? So says the Gemara, just the Maisa, the way it played out is b'shekanu lazu v'lo kanu lazu, because there was a kinyan as it related to his stepdaughter, but there wasn't a kinyan as it related to his actual daughters, and therefore the daughters can only collect from nechasim b'nei chorin, from properties that don't have a lien. Masha'en kain, the stepdaughter is allowed to collect even from properties that do have a lien. So says Gemara, my paska, how are we supposed to understand this halacha? Is it true across the board that a stepdaughter is treated better than the daughters? It doesn't always work out that way. Says the Gemara, what's the case? Bast ishto dehavoy b'shas kinyan, mahani la kinyan. The stepdaughter, so let's say a man marries a woman, and when he marries her, he knows that she has a daughter. So if I marry a woman like that, then at the moment that I marry the woman, she already has a daughter. My daughters aren't born yet. So says the Gemara that Bas Ishto, the daughter of my wife, my stepdaughter, Dehavoi B'Shas Kinyan, she was there when I got married. Therefore, by her, Mahani La Kinyan. Therefore, absolutely, there's a Kinyan that was to be made, and it supports her and not my own daughters. But Bito, the daughters of this man, Delo Habu B'Shas Kinyan, when I married this woman and her daughter came in tow, okay, Lamaisa, she was there. So the Gemara says that she was there b'shas kinyan, but the daughter who was not there b'shas kinyan, lo mahani lo kinyan. The Gemara says that a kinyan will not help. Milo askinan dahabu tarvayu b'shas kinyan. How can you say that? It's very possible that we're dealing with a case that really both the daughters and the stepdaughters were there at the same time. What is the case? The Garsha ve'ahadra, where there was a divorce, and he came back to this particular woman. That maybe they did have children and the children were growing up, and then there was a divorce, and then he came back into the family, and there was a stepdaughter from her first marriage and the common children to this husband and wife during the second marriage. Ella must be that Bito, that his daughter, Dibitnai Bezdin Ka'achla, that when it comes to his daughter, a man's daughter, no matter what the case is, whether or not there's going to be a shtar, it doesn't matter. A father's always obligated to feed his daughter based on a t'nai bezdin. So therefore, lo mahani lo kinyan. Thereby, by her, the kinyan doesn't help at all. But bas ishto, a stepdaughter, dilab b't'nai bezdin ka'achla. A stepdaughter doesn't necessarily guarantee food. You need a man to be a good man, a good husband who marries in and says, even though you're my stepdaughter, I'll treat you like my own, and I'm going to make a t'nai on your behalf. Then mahani lo kinyan. So says the Gemara, I understand your distinction that there is a natural difference between bito and bas ishto, that by your daughter there's a t'nai bezdin that guarantees her food, but not by the stepdaughter. So says the Gemara, v'chi migra gora, is it in fact the case that the stepdaughter always is going to have it better than the daughter? It just seems a little uneven. So says the Gemara, you're right. Elabito, kevan de b't'nai bezdin ka'achla, when it comes to the daughter, since the daughter is guaranteed food by Bezdin, Amar, it's possible that Tzrare Itvisa, that she grabbed some coins. In other words, a father will always make sure to take care of his bloodline, and he's going to give over a satchel of money to this daughter no matter what, but that will not be happening necessarily to the Bas Ishto. So therefore, you're right that on its face, it appears that there's a difference between Bas Ishto and Bito, that the Bas Ishto, the stepdaughter, is allowed to collect monies, even from Nechasim Mishubadim, even from properties with a lien. But the daughter seemingly can only collect from properties that are B'nei Chorin. But the Gemara says that the reason why we really make this distinction is because I will always make sure to take care of my children as parents do. And when they go off on their own, I'm going to give my daughter a chunk of change. She can have a credit card, a debit card, whatever the case may be. And that is the distinction. Okay, we are halfway down on on-the-Daf Amud Aleph. We have about 20 minutes left until Ma'ariv, so we're going to have to keep moving. Ta Shma. We had said on the bottom of the previous page in yesterday's conversation that in a case scenario where I am collecting money from fruits, that those fruits can only be collected from properties that are b'nei chorin. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nasan, Emasai, when is this true? That the rule of collecting from only properties that are b'nei chorin, that's only true bisman shekadam mekcho shel sheni l'shivcho shel rishon. If the purchase that I'm making on this field, when I collect on my field, is done at a time that the fruits have not yet grown, that makes perfect sense. Aval, but had it been the case, says the Gemara, that kadam shivcho shel rishon l'mekcho shel sheni, if when I am going to buy back this field, or really take back the field, collect on this field, but at that point the trees are laden with fruits, then gova minachasim mishubadim. Then even the fruits, even that aspect of the purchase can be taken from nechasim mishubadim, even from those properties. Alma, says the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, mishum delo kadimhu. That the only reason why in our Gemara yesterday, when we had said that when a person is collecting peiros or collecting property because of peiros, that he can only collect from bnei chorin, that's because at that time there must not have been any fruits. But that's not what we learned yesterday. Yesterday, we didn't learn that. Yesterday, we were under the strong assumption with no dissenting opinions that when a person is collecting from fruits, collecting properties on behalf of fruits, it has to be from properties that are b'nei chorin, that have no liens. And says the Gemara, you're right. It does appear that there are different shitas, and really, tanoihi. It's actually a machlokas tanoim as to whether or not one who has to collect fruits can only collect from properties that are nechasim b'nei chorin, or even from properties that are nechasim mishubadim. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, 3/4 of the way down. We had said in our Mishnah on Mem Chesam at Beis at the beginning of the parak, Ein Motzian, you're not allowed to take anything from properties that are mishubadim, as we'll soon see at the end of the sentence. Ein Motzian la'achilas peros u'l'shvach karkos. A person cannot collect from nechasim mishubadim anything for peros or shvach karkos, the improvements of land, u'lemazon isha ve'abanos, feeding a wife and daughters. Minachasim mishubadim. You're not allowed to do that. Mibnei tikun ha'olam lefisha ein ksuvin. We want to make sure that when we are taking from properties that are nechasim mishubadim, that at least they're documented directly in the contract. And here in this case, this brisa is explicit. It's different than our Mishnah. Our Mishnah lists these, but without the svara. And here we see that the reason why in all of these cases you're not allowed to collect from properties that are nechasim mishubadim is because because they're not written down. Hi, Amar Rabbi Yossi, v'chima tikun ha'olam yesh bezu. What tikun olam is that? The fact that it's written down or not. V'halo ein ksuvin. The tikun olam that we're dealing with is that the amounts are not fixed. And if the amounts are not fixed, then you cannot collect from nechasim mishubadim. So what do we see from here? That the Tanakama holds that the primary feature is ksuvin, and that the Rabbi Yossi holds that the primary feature is kitsuvin in regards to fixed amounts, as we've been learning. And therefore, that is a wonderful summary of our Gemara up until now, that there is, in fact, a machlokas Tanoim that reflects the machlokas amoraim that we saw on the previous page. On the previous page, we had seen the shita of Ula, who said that the primary concern as to whether or not you can collect from the nechasim mishubadim is whether or not this is written up in a shtar. If it's written up in a shtar, yes, you can collect from the nechasim mishubadim. If not, not. And according to Rabbi Chanina, no, it wasn't about whether or not it's written in a shtar, but whether or not it's kitsuvin, if it's a fixed amount. If it's a fixed amount, normal amount of money that everyone knows to anticipate, it can be collected from the nechasim mishubadim. And if not, not. And that brings us to the next sugya, which is about 10 lines or so from the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, which is a line that was seemingly very random in our Mishnah at the open of the parak. We're learning parak hanizakin. At the end of that Mishnah, we saw this line, V'hamotze mitzia lo yishava, that if a person finds a gift, not a gift, if a person finds a lost item, then they're not supposed to make a shvuah. So the Gemara now presents some challenges to this idea. Our Mishnah seems to be categorical. Yet Amar Rav Yitzchak, if a man says, Shnei kisin kshurin matzasli, a man says that I lost these two wallets that were tied to one another. V'hala Amar, and the finder says, Lo matzasi ela echad. And if I say I'm the finder and you're the one who lost your two satchels of money that are tied together, so in that case, nishba, I have to make a shvuah in that case. However, in contrast, although very similar, 5 lines from the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom, Shnei shvarin kshurin matzasali. I was hoping someone could help me find these two shvarin, these two shores that are lost to me. V'hala amar lo haya ela echad, there eino nishba. That's a very odd distinction. Let's say it outside. If two satchels of money are tied together, and I said, I only found one, I have to make a shiur. If two cows are tied together, and I say, I only found one, I don't have to make a shiur. Why? What's the difference? Well, before we do that, let's just add one more case. Oh, sorry, no, we're going to give the my timer right now. My timer, because shvarin menatche me'adade. When it comes to shvarin, they pull on one another, and if there are strings that are holding them together, they can easily separate from one another. But kisin are inanimate objects. These satchels that hold money are inanimate, and therefore lo menatche me'adade. So we have to look at the mitzias. If you announce in shul, I lost two of my satchels, and I say I found one of them, then I have to make a shiur because those are inanimate objects. They don't pull on one another. But if you say in shul, I can't find my my two cows, and I say I found one of them, there you don't have to make a shiur because cows don't run away. And another case, shnei shvarim kshurin matzas. If a person says that he's lost his two shvarim, v'hala amar matzasi v'echzarti lach echad mehen. I did find them, but if you'll recall, last week I brought back one of them and I just found the second one. Now here you go. We're all even up. Says the Gemara, no, hareze nishba. In that case, he has to make a shiur as well. So asks the Gemara, I don't understand. I don't understand. You're telling me that there are times that you have to make a shiur on a lost item. But our Mishnah on Mem Chesamid Beis says, and look at the 2 dots, 10 lines from the bottom, v'hamotze mitzia lo yishava. But you just showed me 2 cases where you do make a shiur. So asks the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Rav Yitzchak Lesle, does he not hold of our Mishnah that says, hamotzi mitzia lo yishava mipnei tikun ha'olam? You got to make up your mind. You're either a party line or you're not. Our Mishnah was very clear at the beginning of the parak. When you find a lost item, we're never going to make you make a shiur. What's the tikkun olam component? Forget it. I'm not picking up a lost item. I don't want to make a shiur. I don't want to get involved in that. I want to be helpful. I want to do a mitzvah and return a lost item. Every time I pick something up, you're going to make me do a shvah. That's unacceptable. So the tikkun olam was that our Mishnah said you're not allowed. What about Rav Yitzchak? Rav Yitzchak says you have to make a shvua in a whole variety of cases. So says the Gemara that the shita of Rav Yitzchak, who says that sometimes you have to make a shvua, Huda Amar Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. Mirza Hashem will get to the very bottom of the page. Last word. That's our target. We have 11 minutes, and I really hope to get there. So says the Gemara D'Tanya. The Brayta writes, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov Omer, Pa'amim sha'adam nishba al tainas atzmo. That there are times that a person has to make a shvua even with his own taina. Ketzad, what's the case? If I say Mana le'avicha biyadi v'he'echaltiv pras, I owe your father $100, but by the way, I ate half of it. So hareze nishba. I have to make a shvua that's modeh b'mixas ataina. V'zehu shenishba al tainas atzmo. That's an example where I say something and it forces me into a taina. It forces me into a shvua. That's called tainas atzmo. But the chachamim disagree. The chachamim omrim eino ela k'meshiv aveda upater. No, nothing at all. You're totally fine. It's like meshiv aveda. So on this shita, the Gemara asks also. Rabbi Yitzchak was relying on Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. So here too, the Gemara says 6 lines down on Nun Aleph Amabez, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov lesle meshiv aveda pater. I don't understand. What about our Mishnah on Mem Chesamid Beis? You should never be making a shvua on a shavas aveda. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rab b'toa no katan. We're talking about a case where I make this claim of mano la'avicha b'yadi, but I'm talking to a katan. Says the Gemara, what does that have to do with anything? A katan, midei mishasha ispe, the katan's a 0. It's like you're talking to a wall. He's a kid. He doesn't know anything. Nothing at all. So says the Gemara, you're right, but we're not dealing with a regular katan. My katan, look at this odd language, gadol. This katan is a gadol. What do you mean? Why is this katan called a gadol? A gadol is a gadol and a katan is a katan. Says the Gemara, my kar la katan de lagabe mili David, because as it relate when I was a teenager, same Gemara. The Gemara says over here that when you have a 15-year-old, he might be halachically a gadol, but he has no clue how to run a house. He's a katan who, as it relates to his father's affairs. So says the Gemara, ihachi tainas atzmo. Why are you calling that tainas atzmo? That's tainas acherim. If I'm talking to the gadol, he's 15 years old. And you're saying he's like a katan, but lamaisa, I'm making a taina, but it's about somebody else's, it's about the father's money. So that really should be called tainas acherim. Says the Gemara, tainas acherim v'hodas atzmo. Really, we're talking about where it's a tainas acherim. Yes, you're right. It's a claim about other people's money. V'hodas atzmo, and he's just admitting. And it says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Kulhu ta'anosa nami tainas acherim v'hodas atzmo ninu. But the whole claim over here, this whole case of our Mishnah of Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov is really not about you. It's about money you owe to other people. Ella says the Gemara, Gemara, what are we dealing with? B'di Rabba kamiflagei. Really, the Brisa at the top of the page is arguing about Rabba. Now, of course, Rabba is an Amora and lives well after the times of the Tanaim. He was a 3rd century Amora. So all it means is they were arguing about the same thing. And the Gemara says, the Amar Rabba halfway down on Nun Aleph and Beis, Mipnei Ma Amra Torah, why is it that we say that when a person admits to half of a claim that there needs to be a shavua? Says the Gemara, Chazaka, we have a general assumption of ein adam meiz panav bifnei bal chova. A person is not going to be totally brazen and say, I owe you nothing. He really wanted to say, I owe you nothing, but he couldn't bring himself to it. He would have loved to have lied, but our psychology is not that way. When you're standing in front of the guy who gave you the loan, it's very difficult to say in front of that guy that you didn't give me the loan. Really, he owes everything. He owes everything. But the reason why he's not willing to admit everything is because he doesn't have all the cash right now. So he's like, I admit to half of the money you lent me. In the back of his mind, he's preparing to pay the rest later. Savar, down the road, I'll have the money, but I just don't have it right now. So because he says that this is the svara, that really I owe you everything, but I'm going to half lie and say I only owe you half because I don't have the rest to pay, says the Gemara, in such a case, Rami Shvua Ilave, we tell a person you're going to need to make a shvua because moda b'mixas ataina is a svara in the Torah that we think you're actually only partially telling the truth. Yes, you agree that you owe half, you really owe whole, but because you're tempted to lie because you don't have all the money in hand, we therefore force a shvua on you. That's the Tanakama. Rebbe Lazar ben Yaakov Savar Loshna Bo Veloshna Bibno. It doesn't matter who he's talking to the father from whom he borrowed the money or his son. Eino meiz v'hilkach lav meishiv aveda. This isn't a case of meishiv aveda. So really, we're answering our question from the top of the page. Why did Rebbe Lazar ben Yaakov say that? Why did Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov say that this person has to make a shvua? After all, it looks like an aveda. He says it's not a case of aveda. It's a regular case of a taina from another person. Masha'enkin v'rabbanon savre bohu de'eno meiz aval bibno meiz. When it comes to the son, he is willing to lie. Umidlo meiz, by virtue of the fact that he didn't, and now he's saying that he has to pay off even half. Then it's meishiv avedahu, because he's giving back. It must be that he's telling the truth, and we don't need a shvua in this case, and therefore he has to treat it like a meishiv aved, and there's no shvu at all. So the lumdus behind Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and the Chachamim and the brisa at the top is whether or not we view the case of that brisa of mana le'avich biyadi as a case of meishiv aveda, which is the sheet of the Chachamim, which is why there's no shvua, or the case of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov who says this isn't meishiv aveda. This is a case of modeh b'mixas ataina. That's not meishiv aveda, and therefore the shvua that we have to make is not because of that. Therefore, the Gemara concludes that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov is not of the opinion that we are allowed to make a shvua against Meishiv Aveda. That's not true. He would hold like our Mishnah. You absolutely have to make a shvua in the case of Meishiv Aveda. This just isn't that case. This is a case of Modeh b'mixas ataina, and that's why you'll make a shvua. We'll stop right here. At some point tomorrow, I'll record Daf Nun Beis Mid Aleph. In Yirtzeh Hashem, my recording will end at the 2.7 lines or so from the bottom of the page, and then on Shabbos, we'll pick up from there. Wishing you all a beautiful night.